My husband, Keaton Smyth, CEO of Orion Corp, ran the company under strict rules. I brought in a $10 million investment. But I clocked in 1 second late, so bye-bye VP promotion. I got accused of disrespecting company policy, demoted, and slapped with a pay cut. Then there was Evie Larsen, his shiny new assistant. She ditched work on the day of a huge contract signing and trashed Orion's only shot with a public company. Keaton's response? No punishment. No write-up. He called it personality, promoted her right there, gave her a raise, and tossed her a Riverview apartment as company housing. Evie still wanted more. She pushed to take over Orion's core project, all so she could prove herself. I shut her down. That same day, she marched into Keaton's office and accused me of power tripping, insulting her, and refusing to train her. I thought Keaton would see through it. The next morning, my name was gone from the project team. My file access was revoked, too. Since you're too senior to mentor new hires, you're starting over. Entry-level sales rep, same level as them. Everyone waited for me to snap. I just smiled and handed over the flash drive with the project data. Keaton nodded, pleased. Don't let it happen again. What he didn't know? That data wasn't complete. The second they uploaded it, the errors would tank the project, and trigger a breach of contract penalty big enough to bury them. Keaton took the flash drive from my hand, smiled at the teary-eyed Evie, and placed it in hers. Then he looked at me, his face going cold. This demotion is your warning. Screw up again, and I won't go easy on you. After a brief pause, he added, I hope everyone takes this as a lesson. Just because you've been here longer doesn't mean you can do whatever you want. Don't end up like Tessa. I stayed quiet. My teammates didn't. Mr. Smyth, this isn't fair. Everyone knows Tessa built this project. Why does Evie get to take it over when she hasn't even been here 6 months? Tessa lived at the office for this project. She worked herself so hard she nearly ruined her eyes. How does Evie get all the credit just by saying a few words? She's brand new. She barely knows how anything works. If she takes over a project this big and blows it, or misses the deadline, we're the ones who'll pay for it. Keaton frowned. Enough. This is a company, not a circus. Stop making a scene. If Tessa can run the project, someone else can too. Evie's new, but she's every bit as capable. Get her up to speed, and she'll do even better. And that's final. Anyone who keeps arguing can join Tessa in entry-level sales. The room slowly fell silent. My teammates still looked ready to fight for me, but I lifted a hand and stopped them. Keaton had already made up his mind. Pushing him now would only get them dragged down with me. Evie's eyes filled with grateful tears. Mr. Smyth, I won't let you down. I'll prove you made the right choice. I'm just as good as anyone else. Keaton's face lit up. I let out a cold laugh and shook my head. Did Evie seriously think she could learn this overnight? If it were that easy, the client wouldn't need us. Keaton wouldn't have made it Orion's core project. Evie caught my laugh and instantly played victim. Tessa, I know you're mad about losing the project, but I just wanted a chance to prove myself to Mr. Smyth. Why do you always act like you're better than me? Yeah, I speak my mind. That's on me. If I messed up, you could have just told me. Why give me attitude? I'm not that petty. I can take criticism. Then she squeezed out 2 tears. And shifted just enough for Keaton to see. Sure enough, the second Keaton saw her tears, his expression softened. Tessa Thorne, did you already forget what I just said? Or are you trying to get yourself fired? Check your attitude. No wonder your team's so unprofessional. They learned it from you. Write me a 10-page reflection and have it on my desk before the day's over. I clenched my fists. My teammates defended me for all of 2 seconds, and somehow they were the unprofessional ones. But Evie? She strolled in late, left early, and never had to clock in. She skipped work whenever she felt like it. Even when she tanked a project and cost the company money, nothing happened. Me? I spent countless late nights landing Orion a $10 million investment. 1 second late. 1 missed punch. That was enough for Keaton to mark me absent, yank the VP position he'd promised me, accuse me of breaking company policy, slash my pay, and demote me. Now, after hearing nothing but Evie's side of the story, he dumped me into entry-level sales. Super professional. Guess I should be ashamed. My bad. Then Keaton pulled out a gift box and handed it to Evie. You're taking over the project, so consider this a little encouragement. I know you'll do great. Evie opened the box. Inside was a limited edition jewelry set. The room instantly buzzed. Isn't that set over $100 grand? Mr. Smyth really knows how to spoil people. I'm so jealous of Ms. Larsen. With Mr. Smyth backing her, she's set. My eyes locked on the necklace in Evie's hands. I knew that set. I'd wanted it forever, but the price always stopped me. Keaton found out and kept promising he'd buy it for me someday. He never did. Yesterday, I'd found the receipt at home. I'd actually thought he was planning to surprise me. Turns out, it was never meant for me. Keaton looked around the room. From now on, follow Evie's example. Perform well, and you'll be rewarded the same way. And let me be clear one last time, don't pull what Tessa did. Seniority doesn't give you the right to bully new employees. If it happens again, there won't be a warning. That was Keaton's management style: punish hard, reward loudly, and keep everyone fighting to stay on his good side. I'd gotten used to it. The second he walked away, the office erupted in whispers. Ms. Larsen, I'm so jealous. First the Riverview apartment, now limited edition jewelry. You're seriously winning. I know, right? Evie soaked up every word. When her eyes met mine, they gleamed with smug satisfaction. I looked away. I had no interest in watching her gloat. I'd won project after project for Orion Corp, bringing in millions for the company. Everything I'd earned was worth far more than the rewards Evie got handed for free. None of it mattered to Keaton. He always chose her. Whenever I called him out, he'd say Evie reminded him of his late sister, so he couldn't help wanting to look after her. That was his excuse for everything. She blew Orion's only shot at partnering with a public company, and he still covered for her, praised her, and rewarded her with a Riverview apartment. When I questioned him, he humiliated me in front of everyone, accused me of having a twisted mind. Then moved out and froze me out. My teammates muttered beside me. Tessa, why did you give her that flash drive? You spent forever pulling that data from round after round of testing. She's getting it way too easy. Exactly. If every new hire cuts corners like Evie, this company is done. Mr. Smyth can pretend he doesn't see what you did for this project, but we do. Say the word, and we'll get that flash drive back. We're not letting Evie keep it. And once she steps into the project lab, I'll make sure she regrets it. I just shook my head. They didn't have to do a thing. Evie would tank the project all on her own. The second Keaton handed it to her, its fate was sealed. There was no way someone who'd barely been at the company, and spent most of that time slacking off, could handle a project this big. This wasn't just signing paperwork. Keaton's voice cut through the room. Tessa, what are you waiting for? Pack your stuff and move to the main office. You're not management anymore, so you don't get a private office. You're an entry-level sales rep now. Start acting like one, and quit setting a bad example. His words were almost funny. Evie had been at Orion for a few months, and she already had her own private office. So she deserved one, but I didn't. His double standard couldn't be louder. Then I saw the cold look in his eyes. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. Keaton had already given Evie his whole heart. He was the only one still pretending he hadn't. I was about to fire back when he turned to HR. If she refuses to move, make her. Then he walked straight back to his office. The second he was gone, Evie's face changed. She looked me up and down like I was trash. Tessa, if you'd handed over the project sooner, you wouldn't be here. I told you from the start Mr. Smyth values me. He tossed you aside ages ago. You're too old to compete with someone like me. It's honestly pathetic. I ignored her. She wasn't wrong. Keaton did value her. Otherwise, she never would have gotten this arrogant. I'd barely said a few words to Evie, and Keaton had already rushed to her defense like he was ready to rip me apart for her. Evie strolled to my desk, dropped into my chair, and lifted her wrist. The bracelet Keaton had just clasped on her glittered there. She smiled like she'd won. I heard this set's been on your wish list forever, but you never bought it. I mentioned it to Mr. Smyth once, and the next day, he bought the whole thing and gave it to me himself. Guess I'm the one he cares about most. I said nothing. Let her enjoy it. I used to think I knew Keaton. These past few days proved I'd been giving myself way too much credit. Maybe in his eyes, there was no room left for this marriage. Or for me. Seeing I wouldn't react, she smirked. You look like you've never seen real luxury. Admit you're not on my level, and maybe I'll let you get a closer look. My face went cold. Keaton and I had been married for years. We'd built everything we had together. I treasured our marriage. Whatever he asked for, I gave without hesitation. When he wanted half my shares in Orion Corp, I signed them over without a second thought. To me, family always mattered more than business. I honestly thought we'd grow old together. Then Evie showed up. Just days after Keaton hired her, everything changed. He grew distant. Cold. Every little thing she said became another reason to blame me. And every time she caused trouble. He took her side. Despite everyone pushing back, Keaton insisted she get a private office. After that, he stopped caring about Orion's best interests. He let Evie wreck project after project, even when the company's future was on the line. Then he hid behind work while showering her with one perk after another. I'd spent years at Orion. I'd never been treated like that. Did he really think someone who spent all day slacking off could handle a project like this? What a joke. When I still didn't react, Evie just smiled. She pulled out the flash drive and casually tossed it in the air. I glanced at it coldly. She had no clue the data on that drive was incomplete. It still needed rounds of testing before it could be finalized. The latest version was on my phone. I just hadn't updated the flash drive yet. Since Keaton trusted Evie so much and wanted her to prove herself, she clearly didn't need my data. Wasn't she supposed to be capable? A small smile touched my lips. I unlocked my phone and quietly deleted the final data file. Then I looked at her. No thanks. That bracelet fits you perfectly. Don't waste Mr. Smith's gift. Besides, you won't be wearing that jewelry much longer. Evie's face twisted. Ungrateful. She stood, kicked my desk, and stormed off. After work, I was about to leave when I heard a familiar voice. I looked up. Evie was coming down from the company gym with her little squad. Her face was pure contempt. Tessa's nothing. She just met Mr. Smith before I did. What does she have that I don't? The apartment, the project, I mentioned them once, and Mr. Smith rushed to give them to me. Tell me, how could she ever compete? Besides, Mr. Smith told me he's been sick of Tessa for a long time. If they hadn't been married for so many years, he would have divorced her already. Like she needed proof, Evie pulled up her texts and flashed her phone at everyone. A new message popped up. One of the co-workers read it out loud. I booked us a table tonight. Dinner? Evie smirked. See? That's how much Mr. Smith cares about me. And Tessa thinks she can compete? The group instantly started sucking up to her, saying they wanted to stay on her good side from now on. Surrounded by her little fan club, Evie walked away. I clenched my fists until my nails bit into my palms. Then I packed up my things and walked out of Orion Corp. The second I walked into the living room, I spotted an elegant gift box on the table. Inside was an expensive ring. The brand looked familiar. I froze. Was this for me? He was actually willing to spend this much on me? Usually, the gifts Keaton gave me didn't even cost $10. A sticky note sat beside the ring. In Keaton's handwriting, it read, "You're still the one." A bitter laugh escaped me. I set the note back where I'd found it. Keaton had always been like this. As long as I did what he wanted, he'd throw me a reward whenever the mood struck. This wasn't new. I'd gotten used to it. I was about to head upstairs when Keaton came down. He smiled. Do you like it? I had a friend overseas track it down for me. It wasn't cheap. As he spoke, he picked up the ring and reached for my hand. I pulled away. He froze. A few seconds later, he pulled his hand back and set the ring on the table. His expression hardened. Then his voice softened. I know I made you feel humiliated at the office today, but I didn't have a choice. I'm the CEO. I can't play favorites. I'm doing this for our future, and for Orion's. Can't you help me out? Teach Evie. She's talented. Give her a few months, and she'll bring even more value to the company. She just needs a chance. I cut him off. Not happening. I won't do it. He must have thought I was still hung up on the jewelry set he'd given Evie. After a long pause, he tried again. If you'll mentor Evie and help her finish the project, I'll take you to see the Northern Lights. You've always wanted to go. You just never had the time. Say yes, and I'll approve 2 weeks off. As he spoke, he pulled out his phone and booked the trip. I watched him. Did he really think I couldn't say no? The confirmation popped onto the screen. He smiled and held it out to me. I said no. Keaton's smile vanished. His face went ice cold. Tessa, say that again. Everything I'm doing is for our future. If you can't understand that, or even think about what's best for us, then you don't need these tickets. I'll give them to Evie. At least she actually cares about the company. You can stay at work and regret it. Then Keaton slammed the door and left. I watched the door swing back and forth and let out a bitter laugh. So taking Evie to see the Northern Lights had been the plan all along. Why else would he give me such an expensive ring? Not long after, Evie sent me a post. A photo of her and Keaton boarding the plane together. My fists clenched until my fingers went white. Fine. There was no point holding on to a marriage that had already meant nothing for a long time. A week later, I walked into Orion Corp to the sound of laughter. I looked up. Keaton and Evie. Our eyes met. Keaton strolled over, a smug smile on his face. Tessa, turns out Evie handled the project just fine without you. Did you really think this company couldn't survive without you? If anything, you're the one who can't survive without Orion. That's why you kept trying to make yourself look indispensable. Evie slipped in beside him, smiling like she'd already won. Mr. Smith, why argue with her? She's just hiding behind seniority. Honestly, most of the new hires are better than she is. They just never got the chance to prove themselves, just like me. She made sure everyone could hear. The co-workers who'd been talking about the celebration party all turned to look. Whispers spread fast. Someone even sneered right at me. Looks like Evie's not below Tessa at all. Tessa was probably scared Evie would outshine her, so she refused to hand over the project. Laughter rippled through the room. Keaton didn't stop them. He just let everyone mock me. Then he spoke. All right, organize the project files. Nova Corp will be here any minute. Right then, Nova Corp's team walked in. Keaton froze for half a second, then hurried forward. Mr. Linden, you're early. Come in. We just finished the final data set. Once the files are organized, everything will be ready for handoff. Mr. Linden nodded. No rush. Take your time. Keaton smiled and introduced Evie. Evie is the reason this project got finished. Without her, we never would have moved this fast. Then he shot me a look full of disgust. Unlike Tessa. She sat on this project for half a month and got nowhere. Complete waste of time. Luckily, Evie took over and sped everything up. She's one of the most talented people in this company. Just then, the assistant team lead handed Mr. Linden the project files and the flash drive. Mr. Linden nodded and gave the paperwork a quick look. Satisfied, he handed the flash drive to his secretary. She plugged it into her laptop to verify the data. Keaton, Evie, and the rest watched with confident smiles. They were sure the project was flawless. Then the data started loading. A second later. Smoke poured out of the laptop. The screen went black. Silence slammed across the room. Someone tried to joke that Nova Corp must have brought a broken laptop. One look from Keaton shut them up. A second later, the laptop powered back on. Everyone held their breath. The Nova Corp logo slowly appeared on the screen. Keaton and the others had just started to relax. Smoke poured out again. Then. Boom. The laptop exploded right in front of everyone. The room erupted in screams. The silence that followed the explosion was absolute, broken only by the high-pitched ring of safety alarms and the hiss of scorched plastic. A thick, acrid cloud of gray smoke drifted toward the ceiling, smelling heavily of burnt lithium and fried copper. Mr. Linden's secretary sat frozen, her face pale, staring at the blackened, warped ruins of her laptop. Shards of the plastic casing lay scattered across the polished mahogany conference table. What in God's name is the meaning of this, Mr. Smyth? Mr. Linden's voice cut through the room like a blade. He had stood up so quickly his heavy leather chair had scraped violently against the floorboards. Keaton's face went entirely white. The smug, confident smile he had worn just seconds prior vanished, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated panic. Beside him, Evie let out a sharp, pathetic whimper, instinctively clutching the expensive limited edition bracelet on her wrist as if it could somehow shield her from the disaster. Mr. Linden, I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding, Keaton stammered, his hands trembling as he reached for a napkin to swat uselessly at the remaining wisps of smoke. It must have been a hardware defect. A faulty battery in your secretary's laptop. Yes, that has to be it. Orion's data is flawless. We ran multiple checks. A hardware defect? Mr. Linden's tech lead, a sharp-eyed man named Marcus, pushed past Keaton. He gingerly used a pen to flip over the charred remains of the laptop, then plugged a diagnostic tablet into the external backup drive that had survived the blast. Marcus tapped the tablet screen for a few tense seconds. The room was so quiet that the rapid clicking of his fingers sounded like gunfire. It wasn't a hardware defect, Mr. Linden, Marcus said, his voice grim. The code on this flash drive is a disaster. It's missing the entire power management protocol and thermal safety loop. When the system tried to compile the simulation, the incomplete logic gates forced the motherboard to draw maximum voltage directly from the auxiliary battery while simultaneously disabling the internal cooling fans. It essentially instructed the hardware to self-destruct. It's a textbook logic bomb. Marcus looked up, his eyes locking onto Evie. Whoever finalized this project didn't just cut corners. They skipped the most basic compilation and integrity checks entirely. If this had been uploaded to our main server instead of a localized testing laptop, it would have fried Nova Corp's entire testing grid. We're talking millions of dollars in infrastructure damage. Mr. Linden's face turned from pale to a deep, dangerous crimson. He turned slowly to look at Keaton, his eyes burning with fury. Is this the flawless work you promised us, Mr. Smyth? Is this the exceptional talent you've been boasting about? Linden pointed a trembling, angry finger at Evie, who shrank back behind Keaton's shoulder. You brought us a hazard. You put my staff in physical danger. No, Mr. Linden, please. Evie sobbed, tears spilling down her cheeks. I didn't. No. I swear I didn't know. I just compiled the files that were on the drive. Tessa gave me that drive. She did this on purpose to ruin me. Keaton, desperate for a lifeline, seized onto her words. Yes. Tessa. He turned his head, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. I was standing near the door, my arms crossed, watching the entire circus with a calm, serene smile. Tessa Thorne. Keaton roared, his voice cracking with desperation and anger. You did this. You deliberately sabotaged the company's core project. You handed over corrupted data because you were jealous of Evie. I knew you were petty, but to commit corporate espionage? You've crossed the line. The entire office turned to look at me. Some of my former teammates looked anxious, but most of them held their breath, waiting to see what I would do. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I simply took a step forward, my heels clicking softly on the floor. Mr. Smith, I said, my voice smooth and perfectly measured. You have a remarkably short memory. Just 10 minutes ago, in front of Mr. Linden and this entire room, you stated that I sat on this project for half a month and got nowhere. You explicitly said that Evie was the one who finished and optimized the data. Are you now admitting that you lied to your client? Keaton opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Furthermore, I continued, pulling my phone from my pocket, you officially revoked my project access and server credentials last Tuesday morning. Here is the automated notification from HR, signed by your hand. I displayed the screen for Mr. Linden to see. I haven't had read or write access to the repository for 7 days. How could I sabotage a project I was legally barred from touching? Mr. Linden looked at the screen, then shot a freezing glare at Keaton. Well, Mr. Smith? Explain that. She. Keaton's sweat was dripping onto his collar now. He looked like a man watching his own execution. She had the physical flash drive. She handed it directly to Evie. I handed over the raw, unrefined data drive that was clearly labeled Version 1.0, unresolved debugging required, I said calmly. It was the only copy on my desk. Any competent project manager would have known to run a basic integrity check before presenting it to a multi-billion-dollar client. But of course, Evie didn't do that. Because Evie doesn't know how. I looked at Evie, whose face was a mask of terror. Tell me, Evie. When you completed the project, what compiler settings did you use? What was the thermal threshold limit you set for the simulation? Evie's mouth worked soundlessly. She looked at Keaton, then at the floor, her tears flowing freely. I just. Mr. Smith said I did a good job. Mr. Linden let out a harsh, disgusted laugh. Enough. I've seen enough of this farce. Mr. Linden, please let us explain, Keaton pleaded, practically chasing the older man as he turned to leave the conference room. We can fix this. Give us 3 days. No, 48 hours. We will have the correct data package delivered to your office. With all due respect, Mr. Smith, you won't be delivering anything to my office. Except a refund and the breach of contract penalty fee, Mr. Linden said, his voice echoing in the quiet hallway. Our contract clearly states that any delivery of corrupt, malicious, or damaging code constitutes a material breach. Not only that, but your negligence has destroyed proprietary Nova Corp testing hardware. It was an accident. A minor technical oversight. Keaton's voice was climbing in pitch. An oversight that almost put my secretary in the hospital, Mr. Linden retorted coldly. My legal team will contact you by the end of the day. Have your checkbook ready, Mr. Smith. The penalty is $50 million, and we will be pursuing every penny. With that, Mr. Linden and his team swept out of the building, leaving behind a heavy, suffocating silence. The moment the elevator doors slid shut, Keaton turned around. His face was distorted with rage. He marched straight toward me, his hands clenched into fists. Are you happy now, Tessa? He snarled, his voice trembling. You've ruined the company. You've ruined our company. All because of your pathetic, childish jealousy. You couldn't bear to see Evie succeed, so you let this happen. I let this happen? I laughed, a genuine, amused sound that seemed to make Keaton's blood boil. Keaton, I spent 3 weeks warning you that Evie was not qualified to handle this. I told you she didn't understand the core architecture of the project. You called me a bully. You accused me of power tripping. You demoted me to entry-level sales and took away my office. I took a step closer to him, looking down at his disheveled appearance. You wanted to show everyone that Orion could run without me. You wanted to prove that your management style was superior. Well, you proved it. You ran a $50 million company straight into a brick wall in less than a week. You had the finalized data. Evie screamed, suddenly finding her voice. She pointed a manicured nail at me. You had it on your phone. I saw you looking at it. You deleted it on purpose. Of course I had it, I said, tilting my head. It was the result of my hard work. But why would I give my proprietary work to a company that doesn't value me? You and Keaton made it very clear that my services were no longer required. You wanted to prove yourself, Evie. I simply gave you the room to do so. You're a monster, Keaton whispered, looking at me as if he were seeing a stranger. We are married, Tessa. Everything I built for us. How could you do this to your own husband? For us? I mocked, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Is that why you gave her the Riverview apartment we bought together as an investment property? Is that why you gave her the limited edition jewelry set you promised me for 3 years? Is that why you booked tickets to see the Northern Lights, a trip I've begged you to take for half a decade, and then took her instead? Keaton flinched. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but I didn't give him the chance. Don't talk to me about marriage, Keaton. You checked out of this marriage the moment she walked through the door. You just didn't have the guts to admit it. Because you wanted to keep using my brain and my connections to fund your lifestyle. I turned my back on him, picking up my handbag from the sales desk. Where do you think you're going? Keaton demanded. The workday isn't over. You're still an employee of this company. Not anymore, I said, pulling a signed document from my bag and tossing it onto the desk. This is my resignation. Effective immediately. You can't resign. Keaton yelled. If you leave now, the board will hold you responsible. I'll make sure you never work in this industry again. Try it, I said, looking back over my shoulder with a cold smile. But I think you have bigger things to worry about today, Keaton. Like how you're going to explain a $50 million lawsuit to the board of directors. The fallout was swifter and more brutal than Keaton could have ever anticipated. By 4 p.m. that afternoon, Nova Corp's legal team had officially served Orion Corp with a breach of contract lawsuit. The news spread through the financial sector like wildfire. By 4:30 p.m., Orion's stock price had plummeted by 30%, and trading was temporarily halted to prevent a total collapse. I sat in the quiet, minimalist office of my attorney, Richard Vance. The room smelled of old paper and expensive coffee, a stark contrast to the chaotic, smoke-filled halls of Orion Corp. You played this beautifully, Tessa, Richard said, sliding a folder across the desk. But we need to move fast. Once the board realizes the extent of the damage, they'll try to freeze all corporate and personal assets associated with Keaton to protect their own investments. We need to file the divorce papers and asset division before that happens. What about my shares? I asked, leaning back in my chair. That's the best part, Richard smiled, a sharp, shark-like grin. You mentioned that when Keaton asked for half of your shares in Orion Corp last year, you signed them over. But do you remember what I told you back then? You told me to hold off on the official state registration until the end of the fiscal year to avoid the restructuring tax, I recalled. Exactly. And because Keaton is notoriously lazy about administrative paperwork and too arrogant to double-check, he never actually filed the transfer deed with the state secretary. Legally, the transfer was never finalized. On paper, you still own a full 50% of Orion Corp's voting shares. I let out a soft laugh. Keaton's greed and laziness had finally caught up with him. He had spent the last year acting like the sole dictator of Orion, completely unaware that he was standing on quicksand. So, what does this mean for the divorce? I asked. It means you hold all the cards, Richard explained. Orion Corp is currently facing a $50 million liability. If the company goes under, Keaton's personal assets, including his share of the marital estate, will be seized to cover the debt. But because your share transfer was never registered, your 50% of the company can be structured as a separate entity. We can file for an emergency division of assets, claiming irreconcilable differences and financial misconduct on his part. Financial misconduct? Using corporate funds to purchase a luxury apartment and expensive jewelry for a junior assistant, Richard said, tapping a stack of documents. My investigators have already pulled the corporate credit card statements. He bought that $100,000 necklace using Orion's R&D budget. He listed it as specialized equipment. That's embezzlement, Tessa. If the board finds out, they won't just fire him. They'll press charges. I stared at the documents. I had known Keaton was blind to his own faults, but I hadn't realized he was stupid enough to commit corporate fraud just to impress a girl who barely knew how to compile a line of code. Let's file it, I said quietly. All of it. The divorce, the asset division, and the fraud report. Consider it done, Richard said. What about the project data? The real version? I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, sleek black flash drive. Unlike the cheap, generic one I had left on my desk for Evie, this one contained 3 Years of my life, perfectly optimized, fully tested, and ready to revolutionize the tech industry. I have a meeting with Mr. Linden tomorrow morning, I said, a small smile playing on my lips. I think he'll find this very interesting. When I returned to our villa that evening to pack the rest of my belongings, the house was dark. I walked into the living room and found Keaton sitting on the sofa in the dark. A half-empty bottle of scotch sat on the coffee table beside the expensive ring he had tried to give me the night before. His tie was undone, his hair was a messy ruin, and he looked 10 years older. The moment the front door closed, he scrambled to his feet. "Tessa!" he gasped, rushing toward me. He looked like a drowning man grasping at a floating branch. "Thank God you're home. You have to help me. The board. They're calling an emergency meeting tomorrow morning. They want to oust me. They're talking about liquidation." He tried to grab my hands, but I stepped back, avoiding his touch. "I'm just here for my things, Keaton," I said, my voice empty of any emotion. "No, please, don't do this," he cried, his voice cracking. "I know I made mistakes. I was stupid. Evie, she's nothing to me. I was just flattered by the attention. I've already fired her. I had security escort her out of the building. Today. I took the keys to the apartment back. I'll sell the jewelry. I'll do whatever you want. It's too late for that, Keaton." "It's not too late." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, his fingers shaking as he unlocked it. "Look. I canceled the trip to the Northern Lights. I booked a new one. Just for us. We can leave next week. We can forget all of this. Just give me the backup data for the Nova project. If we deliver it tomorrow, Linden will drop the lawsuit. We can save the company." I looked at the phone screen, then up at his desperate, tear-stained face. I felt a sudden wave of pity, but no regret. "Do you really think this is just about the project, Keaton?" I asked softly. "You stripped me of my dignity. You stood by and let your little assistant humiliate me in front of the entire company. You took the achievements I worked myself sick for and handed them to her on a silver platter because she smiled at you. And when I spoke up, you treated me like trash." "I was trying to maintain corporate discipline," he argued, his voice rising in panic. "You clocked in late. I had to make an example. I was late because I was at the hospital getting a prescription for my eyes, which were failing because I spent 18 hours a day in a dark lab building your company." I shouted, the anger finally bursting through my calm facade. "And you used that 1 second to strip away my VP promotion and hand it to a girl who didn't even know what our company did." Keaton went silent, his mouth hanging open. "You didn't care about discipline, Keaton. You cared about control. You wanted to feel like the big, powerful CEO, and I was too smart, too independent to make you feel that way. So you found someone weak and manipulative who would stroke your ego." I reached into my bag and pulled out the legal folder Richard had given me. I dropped it onto the coffee table next to the cheap glass of scotch. "These are the divorce papers. I'm suing for a full division of assets, including the villa, our investment accounts, and my full 50% of Orion Corp." Keaton stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. 50%? That's impossible. You signed over half of your shares to me last year. You only have 25%. Check your safe, Keaton. Check the state registry, I said coldly. You never filed the transfer deed. Legally, I still own half the company. And because you used corporate funds to buy Evie's apartment and her jewelry, I've also filed a formal complaint of financial misconduct and embezzlement against you with the board of directors." Keaton's face went from pale to a ghostly, translucent white. He fell back onto the sofa, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. You're going to destroy me," he whispered. "No," I said, picking up my suitcase. "You destroyed yourself. I'm just cleaning up the mess." The next morning, the sun rose over the city in a brilliant, clear blue sky. I arrived at Nova Corp's headquarters at 9 a.m. sharp. Mr. Linden's office was located on the top floor, overlooking the sparkling river. When the secretary escorted me in, Mr. Linden was standing by the window, a cup of black coffee in his hand. He turned around, his expression guarded but curious. "Miss Thorne," he said, gesturing to the leather chairs opposite his desk. "I must admit, I was surprised when your attorney called to request this meeting. I thought you had resigned from Orion Corporation." "I did," I said, sitting down and smoothing my skirt. "But I didn't come here as a representative of Orion. I came here as a representative of myself." I opened my bag, retrieved the sleek black flash drive, and placed it on the desk between us. "What is this?" Lyndon asked, eyeing the drive. The completed, fully optimized, and thoroughly tested data for the core project, I said. This contains the dynamic thermal safety protocols, the optimized power grid integration, and the complete source code. I ran the final compilation simulation on my personal server last night. It ran at 150% efficiency compared to your original specifications, with zero system lag. Mr. Lyndon stared at the drive, then up at me. If you had this all along, why did you let that disaster happen yesterday? Because yesterday, Orion Corp was run by a man who believed that loyalty and expertise could be bought and sold for cheap trinkets, I said frankly. Keaton Smyth needed to realize that he cannot run a multi-million-dollar technology firm on nepotism and ego. I had to let him fail so that the board would see what he truly is. Lyndon leaned back in his chair, a look of profound respect slowly appearing on his weathered face. And what is it you want, Miss Thorne? You didn't bring this here out of the goodness of your heart. No, I didn't, I agreed. Orion Corp is going to liquidate. The board has no way to pay your $50 million penalty, and once my divorce and embezzlement filings hit the public record, the stock will be completely worthless. Keaton Smyth will be bankrupt and likely facing criminal charges. I leaned forward. I want to buy Orion's core R&D division during the liquidation process. I want to take my old team, the engineers and developers who actually built this project, and start a new firm. I've already secured the backing of the $10 million investment fund I brought into Orion last month. The investors have agreed to pull their capital from Orion and redirect it to my new venture. And you want Nova Corp to be your primary client, Lyndon finished, a sharp gleam in his eye. I want Nova Corp to partner with us, I corrected. If you accept this data today, you can launch your prototype on schedule. In exchange, I want Nova to waive the $50 million penalty against Orion, but only on the condition that Orion's board agrees to sell the R&D assets, patents, and equipment to my new company for a nominal fee of $1. Mr. Lyndon stared at me in silence for a long, agonizing moment. Then, slowly, a deep, booming laugh escaped his chest. You are a remarkably dangerous woman, Tessa Thorne, he said, shaking his head in admiration. You've completely dismantled your ex-husband's empire, saved my project, and positioned yourself to buy his company's corpse for $1. I prefer to think of it as efficient restructuring, I smiled. Lyndon picked up the flash drive and handed it to Marcus, who had just walked into the room. Marcus, run the verification. If this code is as good as she says it is, draft the agreement. While I was securing my future, Evie Larsen was experiencing a rapid and brutal descent into reality. After being escorted from the Orion building by security, she had locked herself in the luxury Riverview apartment, refusing to answer Keaton's calls. She was convinced that Keaton would eventually calm down, realize he couldn't live without her, and come crawling back. After all, she was his shiny new star. But her delusion was shattered at 2 p.m. that afternoon when 3 men in dark suits arrived at her door, accompanied by a locksmith. What are you doing? Evie shrieked, throwing open the door as the locksmith began applying his tools to the deadbolt. You can't do this. This is my apartment. Mr. Smyth gave it to me. The lead man, an auditor representing Orion's board of directors, looked at her with cold, clinical detachment. Ms. Larsen, this property is registered under Orion Corp's investment portfolio. It was never legally transferred to your name. Furthermore, Mr. Smyth did not have the authority to authorize your tenancy without board approval. Your employment with Orion Corp was terminated yesterday afternoon for gross negligence and corporate sabotage. No. That was Tessa's fault. She set me up. Evie screamed, her eyes wide with panic. Keaton. Call Keaton. He'll tell you. Mr. Smyth is currently being questioned by the district attorney's office regarding corporate embezzlement, the auditor replied flatly. He has no authority here. You have 2 hours to pack your personal belongings and vacate the premises. Anything left behind will be liquidated to help cover the company's outstanding debts. What about my jewelry? Evie cried, clutching the limited edition necklace around her neck. This was a gift. He gave it to me. That jewelry was purchased using an Orion Corp corporate credit card, falsely billed as research equipment, the auditor said, pulling out a legal seizure warrant. It is stolen property, Ms. Larsen. If you do not hand it over immediately, the police officers waiting downstairs will ascend to arrest you for receiving stolen goods. Evie gasped, her hands flying to her throat. She looked at the auditor, then passed him to the 2 uniformed police officers stepping out of the elevator. The reality of her situation finally crashed down on her. The luxury, the prestige, the easy life she had traded her dignity for, it was all gone. It had been nothing more than a fragile glass castle, built on the lies of a weak man. And it had shattered into 1,000 sharp pieces. With shaking, tear-stained hands, Evie unclasped the $100,000 necklace and dropped it into the auditor's velvet-lined box. She slid the sparkling bracelet off her wrist, her chest heaving with silent, pathetic sobs. I have nowhere to go, she whispered, looking at the empty, cold hallway. That is no longer Orion Corp's concern, the auditor said, stepping aside. You have 1 hour and 50 minutes remaining. The conference room at Orion Corp was suffocatingly tense. The members of the board of directors sat in grim silence, their faces grim as they reviewed the financial sheets. Keaton sat at the head of the table, his suit wrinkled, his eyes bloodshot. He looked like a ghost of the confident CEO who had stood in this same room just 24 hours ago. The stock is down 45%, one of the board members, a harsh-voiced woman named Eleanor, said. Nova Corp's lawsuit is the lead story on every financial news network. Our creditors are pulling our lines of credit. We are facing insolvency within 48 hours, Keaton. What is your plan? I'm working on a restructuring plan, Keaton stammered, his voice weak. If we can just negotiate with Linden. Linden won't even take your calls, Keaton. Eleanor snapped. And then there's the matter of the audit. We found over $300,000 in unauthorized corporate expenses. A Riverview apartment lease. A $100,000 jewelry set. All billed to R&D. You were embezzling from your own shareholders to fund your mistress. She wasn't my mistress. Keaton yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. She was my assistant. It was a retainer. An incentive. Save it for the judge, Keaton, Eleanor sneered. We are voting to strip you of your chairmanship and fire you as CEO. We will also be turning over our audit findings to the district attorney. You can't do that. Keaton cried, slamming his hands on the table. I built this company. I own 50% of the voting shares. You can't outvote me. Actually, Keaton, a smooth, familiar voice cut through the panic, she can. The heavy double doors of the conference room swung open. I walked in, flanked by Richard Vance and Mr. Linden himself. Keaton froze, his eyes widening in horror. Tessa, what are you doing here? You resigned. I resigned as an employee, Keaton, I said, walking to the vacant end of the table and pulling out a chair. But I am still the largest individual shareholder of Orion Corp. And unlike you, my voting rights are actually registered with the state. Richard Vance stepped forward, sliding a certified document in front of Eleanor and the rest of the board. This is the official registration of Tessa Thorne's 50% share ownership of Orion Corp, certified by the Secretary of State. My client has officially vetoed Keaton Smyth's voting power, and she is casting her 50% vote in alignment with the board's decision to remove Mr. Smyth from his position as CEO and chairman, effective immediately. The board members looked at the document, their expressions turning from grim desperation to sudden, relief-filled surprise. The vote is unanimous, Eleanor declared, shooting a look of pure disgust at Keaton. Keaton Smyth, you are officially terminated. Security will escort you from the building. Keaton looked around the room, his eyes darting from face to face, searching for a single ally, a single person who would stand up for him. But there was no one. The people who had smiled and laughed at his jokes just yesterday now looked at him as if he were a piece of garbage. Tessa, please, Keaton whispered, his voice trembling as he looked at me. You can't do this to me. We're family. We built this together. No, Keaton, I said, looking him dead in the eye. I built this. You just got to wear the fancy suit and take the credit. But now, the suit doesn't fit anymore. With Keaton officially removed, the boardroom atmosphere shifted from panic to tentative hope. The board members turned their attention to me and Mr. Linden. Miss Thorne, Eleanor said, her voice respectful. Even with Keaton gone, we still face the $50 million lawsuit from Nova Corporation. The company is empty. How do we survive this? I looked at Mr. Linden, who gave me a slight nod. Mr. Linden has agreed to a settlement, I announced. Nova Corp will waive the $50 million penalty and dismiss the lawsuit with prejudice. A collective gasp of relief swept through the board. But, I continued, there is a condition. Orion Corp must immediately liquidate its R&D division, including all intellectual property, equipment, and active patents associated with the core project. These assets will be sold to my newly formed company, Astra Tech, for the nominal price of $1 The board members exchanged quick, calculating looks. It was a brutal deal for Orion. It essentially stripped the company of its most valuable asset, leaving it as a mid-level logistics and sales firm. But it was the only way to avoid absolute bankruptcy and ruin. We accept, Eleanor said without hesitation. It's better to have half a company than no company at all. Excellent, I said, signing the transfer documents that Richard placed in front of me. Astra Tech will also be taking over the employment contracts of the core engineering team. They will receive a 50% pay increase, proper benefits, and a workplace that values their actual contributions. My old teammates, who had been waiting outside the room, let out a cheer that could be heard through the thick glass walls. I stood up, picking up my pen. I walked over to Keaton, who was still sitting frozen in his chair, staring at the floor. Sign the divorce papers, Keaton, I said, dropping the pen onto his lap. Sign them, and I'll instruct my lawyer to recommend a plea deal to the district attorney regarding your embezzlement charges. You'll avoid jail time, though. You'll still be broke. Keaton looked at the pen, then up at me. His eyes were completely hollow. Stripped of all the arrogance, all the ego, all the power he had used to crush me just days ago. He realized, with a terrifying clarity, that he had traded a brilliant, fiercely loyal partner who had built his empire, for a fleeting, superficial ego boost that had left him with absolutely nothing. With a shaking hand, he picked up the pen and signed his name on the dotted line. 3 months later. The morning sun flooded through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new corner office. The view was magnificent, a wide, sweeping panorama of the sparkling river and the bustling city skyline. It was the exact same view as the apartment Keaton had given Evie, but this time, I hadn't had to beg a man for it. I had bought the entire building. On my desk sat the morning edition of the Financial Chronicle. The headline read, Astra Tech launches groundbreaking prototype, nationwide rollout. Successful. Beside it was a smaller, less prominent article in the local business section. Orion Corp files for bankruptcy, former CEO Keaton Smyth declares personal insolvency. I took a slow sip of my coffee, feeling a deep, quiet sense of peace. A soft knock on my door broke my thoughts. My assistant, a sharp, professional young woman named Maya, walked in with a tablet in her hand. Miss Thorne, Mr. Linden is on line 1. He wants to congratulate you on the launch and discuss our next joint venture in Europe. Thank you, Maya. Put him through in 2 minutes, I smiled. Oh, and one more thing, Maya added, looking a bit hesitant. There is a man downstairs in the lobby. He's been there for an hour, asking to see you. Security asked him to leave, but he refuses. He says he just wants 5 minutes. Did he give a name? I asked. Keaton Smyth, Maya said. He looks, well, he doesn't look very well, ma'am. Shall I have security remove him? I looked out the window at the brilliant city below. For a brief second, I thought about the woman who had cried in her car because she was 1 second late. I thought about the late nights, the ruined eyes, the desperate need for approval from a man who never deserved me. And then, I felt nothing but a cool, clean slate. No need, Maya, I said, picking up the phone to answer Mr. Linden's call. Just tell security to let him know I'm busy. I have a company to run.